My daughter didn't yell when she cut me out of her life. She didn't cry either. She simply stood behind her husband, eyes lowered, and said, "Mom, please don't come here anymore. It's better this way." I remember nodding. Not because I agreed, but because I couldn't breathe. The door closed gently. That was the worst part. No slam, no drama, just finality. For over 3 decades, my life had revolved around one purpose: being her mother. After my husband died suddenly when she was still a child, I became everything: provider, protector, emotional anchor. I worked double shifts as a nurse, took overnight cleaning jobs, skipped vacations, skipped rest, skipped grief. I told myself sacrifice was love, and for years that belief carried me. When she married, I thought my role was simply evolving. Her husband seemed responsible enough, ambitious, polite. When they came to me about buying a home, I didn't hesitate. "We just need help qualifying," she'd said. "You won't have to pay a thing." I signed. I told myself this was what parents did: lift their children higher than they ever stood themselves. At first, everything looked perfect. A nice house, neighborhood barbecues, Sunday dinners, then a baby, my granddaughter. I painted the nursery walls myself. I folded tiny clothes and imagined being needed again. But slowly the air changed. Phone calls shortened. Visits felt rushed. Conversations felt guarded. When I asked harmless questions about money, about stress, I was told I worried too much, that I didn't trust them, that I needed to step back. And then came that evening. I arrived with a casserole like I always did. The door opened only halfway. Her husband spoke for her. "This isn't working," he said. "You make things tense." My daughter echoed him softly. "Please don't come back for a while." That night, I sat alone in my kitchen replaying every moment of motherhood, wondering when love had turned into inconvenience. What I didn't know yet, what would change everything, was that the rejection wasn't emotional. It was strategic. And the next morning, one discovery at my bank would reveal a betrayal far deeper than silence. Because they didn't just push me away, they were hiding something, and it was already costing me everything. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of the words my daughter had said, but because of what she hadn't said. There was something unfinished in her voice, something rehearsed. As a nurse, I'd spent decades recognizing what silence meant. Silence usually meant fear. At 3:12 a.m., I gave up on sleep and opened my laptop. I wasn't looking for proof. I was looking for reassurance. Something to tell me I was imagining things, that this distance was emotional, not something darker. I logged into my bank account, then into the mortgage portal, and my chest tightened. The payment history stared back at me, cold and unforgiving. January paid, February paid, March paid, April missed, May missed, June missed, 3 months, 3 months of silence. I refreshed the page twice, convinced it had to be a mistake, but the numbers didn't change. The balance hadn't moved, no pending transfers, no partial payments. I felt something crack open inside me, not heartbreak, not anger, but disbelief. They'd told me everything was under control. They'd looked me in the eye and said that. I dug deeper. Their checking account still showed deposits, salaries coming in, no emergency withdrawals, no crisis expenses. The money was there. They just weren't paying. And then I noticed something worse, an automatic withdrawal from my account. I'd set it up years earlier as a safety net, a backup payment just in case. I'd forgotten about it, trusted it. For 3 months, while they pocketed their money, my account had quietly covered the mortgage. They weren't struggling. They were letting me bleed without my knowledge. I scrolled through my email and found the warnings buried in spam. Late notices, credit alerts, a sharp drop in my score, all sent to their address, not mine. That's why they'd pushed me away. That's why I wasn't welcome anymore. They hadn't wanted distance. They'd wanted time. I sat there in the dark kitchen, coffee growing cold in my hands, realizing the truth. They hadn't just excluded me emotionally. They had used me. And now, my financial future, everything I'd protected for 40 years, was tied to people who had already proven they would sacrifice me to save themselves. By sunrise, the shock had hardened into something else. Clarity. I picked up the phone and called the mortgage company. By the time the representative finished explaining my options, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. If I didn't act first, I would lose everything. And when I hung up, I made a decision that would force them to finally face the consequences they'd been hiding from. because the safety net they'd been stealing from was about to disappear. I didn't act immediately. That surprised me. I expected rage, panic, a frantic call to my daughter demanding explanations. Instead, what settled over me was something colder and far more dangerous: calculation. I made a list. That's how I survived most of my life. When things became overwhelming, I reduced them to facts. Emotions could wait, numbers couldn't. Fact 1, my name was on the loan. Fact 2, payments had stopped 3 months ago. Fact 3, I had been unknowingly covering the mortgage through a forgotten automatic transfer. Fact 4, they had lied when asked directly. That last fact hurt the most. I called the mortgage company again, this time fully awake, my voice steady. The woman on the line explained everything politely, clinically, like someone describing a slow-moving disaster. As a cosigner, you're equally responsible, she said. If payments stop, foreclosure proceedings will begin. And if I stop the automatic payment? I asked. There was a pause. Then, the primary borrowers will be notified immediately. They'll have 30 days to bring the account current. 30 days. I thanked her and hung up. For a long time, I sat staring at my computer screen. The button was right there. Cancel automatic payment. One click. For years, I had clicked yes without thinking. Yes, I'll help. Yes, I'll sacrifice. Yes, I'll cover it for now. This time felt different. This wasn't punishment. It wasn't revenge. It was survival. They had already chosen themselves. All I was doing was choosing me. My finger hovered. I thought of my granddaughter's small hands, of my daughter as a child asleep against my shoulder, of the woman I'd become by always saying yes. And then I clicked. The screen refreshed. Automatic payments, canceled. I exhaled for the first time in days. My phone buzzed almost immediately, not a call, just a text. Please respect our boundaries. The timing would have been laughable if it hadn't been so revealing. They didn't know yet, but they would. By the next morning, the bank would reach out. By the end of the week, the panic would start. They would realize the safety net was gone and that the person they'd pushed away had been holding everything together. That night, I slept. Not well, but better. Because for the first time since the door had quietly closed on me, I wasn't reacting. I was leading, and I knew deep in my bones that when they came back, it wouldn't be with apologies. It would be with fear. And I would have to decide whether love meant rescuing them again or letting them fall. Because once you stop protecting people from consequences, they finally show you who they really are. It took less than 48 hours. That's how long it took for the silence they demanded to shatter. The first call came while I was watering my plants. I didn't answer. The second came an hour later. Then a third. Then messages, short, clipped, increasingly urgent. Call me. There's a problem. Mom, please. By evening, the tone shifted. This is serious. The bank contacted us. Why would you do this? I read every message without responding. Not because I was cruel, but because I finally understood something I hadn't before. If I answered too soon, I would lose control. The knock came just after dinner. Not polite, not hesitant. Sharp and impatient, like someone who expected to be let in. I opened the door but didn't step aside. My daughter stood there holding my granddaughter, eyes swollen from crying. Her husband stood slightly in front of her, jaw tight, already angry. What did you do? He demanded. I didn't invite them in. I stopped paying a mortgage that isn't mine, I said calmly. My daughter's face crumpled. Mom, the bank says we're behind. They said foreclosure could. You were already behind, I interrupted. For 3 months. Silence. Her husband recovered first. You're a cosigner. If we lose the house, your credit is ruined too. You can't just pull support like this. I didn't pull support, I said. You did when you stopped paying and lied about it. My daughter looked at him, startled. What do you mean lied? He spoke quickly, too quickly. We were going to fix it. We just needed time. You had time, I said. You also had money. Her grip on the baby tightened. We were overwhelmed. No, I replied. You were comfortable letting me absorb the risk. That's when the accusations began, that I was cold, that I was controlling, that I cared more about money than family, that a real mother would never let this happen. Each word was designed to reopen an old wound, and years ago it would have worked, but something had changed. You told me not to come back, I said quietly. You removed me from your life. You don't get to demand my protection now. my daughter whispered. "We didn't think you'd actually do it." That sentence told me everything. They had never believed I would stop sacrificing. I stepped back and closed the door, not in anger. In finality. Inside, my hands shook, but my resolve didn't, because I knew this wasn't the end. This was only the moment they realized the rules had changed. And when people lose the advantage they've relied on, they don't retreat quietly. They escalate. The threats didn't come all at once. They trickled in disguised as concern, wrapped in guilt, sharpened with fear. First, it was my daughter crying on the phone, her voice cracking as she told me how scared she was, how the baby wasn't sleeping, how everything felt like it was falling apart. Then it was her husband, leaving voicemails that sounded calm on the surface but carried an edge underneath. "You're making this worse than it needs to be. We can fix this if you cooperate. Dragging outsiders into this will only hurt everyone." Outsiders, that's what he called the bank. The law, reality. I listened to every message once, then archived them. I'd learned the hard way that repeating lies gives them power. Instead, I made an appointment. The attorney's office smelled like coffee and paper, clean, neutral, nothing like the emotional chaos I'd been living in. I laid everything out. The co-signed loan, the missed payments, the lies, the quiet removal from their lives when I got too close to the truth. He didn't look shocked. "That's important," he said, tapping his pen. "This isn't uncommon. Family situations often rely on silence and obligation." "What are my options?" I asked. He didn't sugarcoat it. I could resume payments and try to negotiate privately. I could pursue formal documentation. Or I could protect myself fully, financially and legally, even if it fractured the relationship beyond repair. "What would you recommend?" I asked. He met my eyes. "I recommend you stop trusting words and start trusting paper." That sentence stayed with me. By the end of the meeting, I had a plan. Letters drafted, timelines outlined, clear steps that didn't rely on promises or emotions. When I got home, my phone was buzzing again. This time, a message from my daughter. "We're family. Why are you doing this to us?" I didn't answer immediately. I sat at my kitchen table, the same one where I'd once helped her with homework, where we'd celebrated birthdays and holidays. I realized something painful but freeing. Family had been the reason I stayed silent, and silence had been the reason they felt safe exploiting me. I typed one message. "I'm handling this through legal channels. Please communicate through my attorney." I stared at the screen before sending it. My hands trembled not from doubt but from grief. I pressed send. The response was immediate. Rage, accusations, threats about what this would do to the family. Warnings that I'd regret it, that I'd lose them forever. Maybe I would. But I also knew this. If I backed down now, I'd lose myself. That night, I slept deeply for the first time since everything began, because the chaos was no longer mine to manage. And because once boundaries are written in ink instead of hope, there's no pretending anymore. The shift was immediate. Once lawyers entered the picture, the tone changed, not softer, not calmer, but sharper. Controlled. Strategic. No more crying voicemails. No more late-night pleas. Instead, silence, followed by a single, carefully worded email from my daughter's husband. "You've left us no choice." That line sat heavy in my inbox. 2 days later, my attorney called. "They're claiming you verbally agreed to cover the mortgage during their financial adjustment period," he said. "They're suggesting this was a misunderstanding, not deception." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. They were rewriting history. I forwarded him everything. Texts, bank records, messages where I'd explicitly asked if payments were current and been told yes. Screenshots showing their income never dropped. Evidence that the money existed, it just wasn't used for the mortgage. There was a long pause on the line. "This is stronger than I expected," he said. "But there's something else." Apparently, in their attempt to build a defense, they'd made a mistake. They'd submitted partial financial disclosures, enough to appear cooperative, but not enough to tell the full story. My attorney had requested full records through formal channels. What came back stunned both of us. Not only had they stopped paying the mortgage, but during that same period, they'd taken out 2 personal loans. One under my daughter's name, one under his. The money hadn't gone toward childcare or necessities. It had gone toward lifestyle, electronics, travel deposits, credit card balances, things they never mentioned, while letting me unknowingly fund their home. But the most damaging detail? They'd applied for additional credit using my information as a reference without my consent. That crosses a line, my attorney said quietly. This isn't just irresponsible, it's exploitation. When confronted, they denied it at first, then minimized it, then blamed stress, parenthood, pressure, me. You're overreacting, my daughter said during a brief, supervised call. You always do this. Something in me hardened. No, I said, I finally stopped underreacting. The legal process moved quickly after that. Formal notices, deadlines, consequences. And then, unexpectedly, their own support system cracked. I received a call from someone I didn't expect, his mother. Her voice was tight, controlled, furious. They told us you were unstable, she said, that you were confused, that you'd abandoned them. I closed my eyes. They lied, she continued, and now we see a pattern. I wasn't the first. I'd just been the first to stop it. That night I sat alone, absorbing the weight of it all, the betrayal, the manipulation, the realization that love had been weaponized against me, but I also felt something else. Relief. Because the truth was out, and once truth surfaces, it can't be buried again. And soon, they would face consequences, far beyond losing my support. The meeting was not my idea. It was demanded. Once the lies unraveled and their excuses collapsed, the remaining supporters in their lives insisted on clarity. Not emotions, not interpretations. Facts. So we met in a neutral place, a small conference room at a law office. Fluorescent lights, a long table, too many chairs. I arrived early. When my daughter and her husband entered, they looked smaller than I remembered. Tired, defensive. No baby this time, no shield. They avoided my eyes. The conversation began with logistics, documents, timelines, payment records. My attorney spoke calmly, methodically, as if narrating a case study. Dates, amounts, statements that contradicted each other. Each inconsistency was laid out like evidence on a tray. When my daughter finally spoke, her voice shook. We didn't think it would get this far. That sentence echoed painfully familiar. You never do, I replied. That's the problem. Her husband bristled. This feels like an ambush. No, I said evenly. An ambush is what happens when someone doesn't see it coming. You knew exactly what you were doing. Silence followed. Then came the turning point. One of the witnesses, someone who had believed them unquestioningly, asked a simple question. If she hadn't checked the records, how long would this have continued? No one answered, because the answer was obvious. As long as it worked. The realization hit the room like pressure change. Their narrative didn't just fracture, it collapsed. The sympathetic faces hardened. The benefit of the doubt evaporated. My daughter cried then, real tears this time. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said. I just didn't know how to stop once it started. I believed her. But belief didn't erase damage. I love you, I told her. But love doesn't erase accountability. The terms were presented clearly. I would be removed from all financial responsibility permanently. Formal repayment arrangements would be enforced. No private deals. No, we'll make it right later. And most importantly, distance, not punishment, protection. When the meeting ended, my daughter lingered. Does this mean we're done? She asked quietly. I considered the question longer than she expected. It means things won't go back to how they were, I said. Some breaks change the shape forever. She nodded, wiping her face. I watched them leave together, still united but fractured. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilt. I felt peace, because the truth had finally been spoken aloud, and once truth is witnessed, it demands a future built differently. Life didn't snap back into place after that meeting. There was no dramatic relief, no sudden happiness. What came instead was quiet, an unfamiliar, almost unsettling quiet. The kind that forces you to sit with yourself once the noise of crisis is gone. For weeks, I woke up unsure of who I was without constantly fixing someone else's problems. My phone stayed silent. No demands, no emergencies, no guilt dressed up as love, and slowly, something unexpected happened. I began to breathe. The legal process resolved itself piece by piece. My name was formally removed from all financial obligations. Repayment was structured and enforced through channels that didn't rely on trust or emotion. I didn't have to chase anyone. I didn't have to remind anyone. The system carried the weight instead of my shoulders. But the real work wasn't financial. It was internal. I grieved, not just the relationship I'd lost, but the version of myself that believed endurance was the same as love. That sacrifice without limits was noble. That being needed was the same as being valued. I started making choices that would have once felt selfish. I downsized my home. I traveled. I took long walks without explaining where I was going or when I'd be back. I spent money on experiences instead of emergencies. I built friendships that didn't require me to rescue anyone to earn my place. Some nights I still thought about my daughter, about the child she once was, about the woman she might still become. I didn't hate her, but I didn't chase reconciliation either. Because peace isn't found by reopening doors that taught people it was okay to hurt you. I learned something profound in the aftermath of all this. Boundaries don't destroy relationships. They reveal which ones were never built on respect to begin with. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe time will soften things. Maybe accountability will change her. Maybe it won't. What I do know is this: I am no longer living as collateral damage in someone else's story. I reclaimed my name, my time, my worth. And if you're listening to this story wondering whether you're cruel for finally saying no, wondering if protecting yourself makes you heartless, wondering if love means enduring harm, let me tell you what it actually means. Love without boundaries is not love. It's erosion. And choosing yourself isn't abandonment. It's survival. So ask yourself this: what would your life look like if you stopped setting yourself on fire to keep someone else warm? Because the moment you stop is the moment your real life begins.